Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. We would like to welcome you to our 32nd Confucian Night with the theme of Confucianism and beyond. This event is part of the University of Santo Tomas Faculty of Arts and Letters initiatives through the Department of Philosophy and the Asian Studies Society to commemorate the great teacher of ancient China. Join us as we celebrate the life, the honors, and the philosophical teachings of Kongzi, or better known in the West as Confucius. I am Kian Pableo from the USC Department of Philosophy, and I would like to introduce to you my partner who will be helping me lead this event tonight from the Asian Studies Society, Mr. Walden Opela.
That's right. Thank you, Kian Pableo, for that introduction. Once again, good evening, everyone, to our viewers and listeners, wherever you may be right now. Just don't forget to like, comment, and share on this event with our hashtag UST Confusion Night 2020. Now, as it is with my great privilege to welcome all of you to our celebration of the 32nd Confusion Night this year, 2020. Now, tonight is not just a special event for all of us, but more for this great philosopher, uh, influencer, and the master himself who once said, and I quote, I hear and I forget. Our greatest glory is not in never failing, but in rising up every time we fall. Do not do to others what you don't want others do unto you. Today, we go back more than 2,500 years ago to commemorate and bring back the life of Confucius, who taught us knowledge, benevolence, loyalty, and virtue. I'm Walden Apella from UST Asian Studies Society, and join us as we live Confucianism and beyond. This is Philosophy and Roots of Ancient China. Now, every event is with great honor with the power of a prayer. And so, to finally begin with this event, let me call on Ms. Candy Santos, also from the Asian Studies Society, to lead us into our opening prayer.
Let us put ourselves in the holy presence of God, in the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit. Amen. Almighty Father, we praise and thank you for giving us and our loved ones the gift of life. We pray that you may protect and guide each and every one of us, especially in these trying times. In this event, may we learn to apply all our learnings in our daily lives. Amen. In the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit. Amen.
Now, to finally welcome the ground for the direction of everyone, we would like to call upon Mr. Anton Heinrich Renisland, MA, to deliver the welcoming remarks on behalf of Associate Professor Rovito V. Carino, PhD, the Chair of the USC Department of Philosophy. Sir Anton.
Good evening to all. I have been tasked to deliver the opening remarks of Dr. Jovito Carino, the Chair of the Department of Philosophy, University of Santo Tomas, Manila, Philippines. He expresses his regret in not being able to be virtually present because of a prior engagement. He though sends the following message. I wish to thank and congratulate the Department of Philosophy and the Department of Interdisciplinary Studies through the able leadership of Mr. Peter Mara for organizing the online version of the yearly anticipated event, the Confucian Night. Now, on its 32nd year, this annual celebration of ideas and friendship has doubtlessly become a hallmark in the academic lives of BA Philosophy and Asian Studies students, both past and present. This year, we are fortunate to have as our guest speakers two distinguished alumni of the Department of Philosophy, Dr. Christine Tan and Dr. Casey Cabural. Their presence tonight, not to mention the wisdom they will impart, hopefully will inspire our undergraduate students to pursue their academic and career goals with sharper focus and perseverance in the way our guest speakers worked hard for theirs. In a special way, we also acknowledge with sincere gratitude and profound appreciation the constant inspiration provided by the acknowledged father of the annual Confucian Night celebration, the Venerable Master, Professor Dr. Alfredo Koch. Were it not for his scholarly legacy and paternal solicitude, the Confucian Night will begin and end just like any other nocturnal event. But thanks to his vision, the Confucian Night tonight, as it will be in the coming years, will unfold and linger in our collective memories as an experience worth celebrating, as it is worth remembering. Maraming salamat po at magandang gabi sa lahat.
The Confucian Night is considered The Confucian Night is considered a highlight activity of ArtLet students taking up philosophy and Asian studies program. Founded in 1988 by Professor Emeritus Alfredo Pico, the event commemorates the birth anniversary of the great master Kongzi every 28th day of September. Perhaps it is the only event in the country that is devoted to celebrate the great philosopher sage.
Remember, I came back 81, and at that stage, I thought there was only Saint Thomas.
The Confucian Night is considered a highlight activity of ArtLet students taking up philosophy and Asian studies program. Founded in 1988 by Professor Emeritus Alfredo Pico, the event commemorates the birth anniversary of the great master Kongzi every 28th day of September. Perhaps the Confucian Night is considered a highlight activity of ArtLet students taking up philosophy and Asian studies program. Founded in 1988 by Professor Emeritus Alfredo Pico, the event commemorates the birth anniversary of the great master Kongzi every 28th day of September. Perhaps it is the only event in the country that is devoted to celebrate the great philosopher sage.
Remember, I came back 81, and at that stage,
The Confucian Night is considered a highlight activity of ArtLet students taking up philosophy and Asian studies program. Founded in 1988 by Professor Emeritus Alfredo Pico, the event commemorates the birth anniversary of the great master Kongzi every 28th day of September. Perhaps it is the only event in the country that is devoted to celebrate the great philosopher sage.
remember, I came back 81, and at that stage, I thought there was only St. Thomas More lecture that was mainly directed to the academic community. And I thought that it is important to come up with a formal forum for students. There should be an avenue for an annual conference that is focused on philosophy. Now, at that time, since I was handling Chinese philosophy in the major, and the course has to be given to the major students, so I decided to organize an annual lecture dedicated to Confucius. It became very popular. In fact, it was an event that was being looked forward to by Philo majors and AS majors. That it went on. every time a new class is offered in Chinese philosophy, students would come eagerly trying to organize the conference. It was almost part of their senior class highlight activities, academic highlight activities.
Through the years, the event caters to the academic needs of the students and faculty in conference organization, event management, and academic dialogue among scholars in the field of Confucian philosophy. But what makes this event very unique is perhaps the essential harmony of different facets of life combined in one spectacle: the rational intellectual, cultural, gustatory, and most importantly, the social interpersonal. Students and faculty members take this event seriously, that they come in their best outfit as they listen to an academic lecture, enjoy a sumptuous banquet, and socialize with the guests. Perhaps such event can be translated to Kongtsu's primordial love for life and its ceremonious celebration. For the past 3 decades, the Confucian Night has conducted lectures delivered by top diplomats, professors, researchers, postgraduate students, religious, and many more. On its fourth decade since its inception, the Confucian Night continued to inspire the future researchers, scholars, and enthusiasts of Confucian philosophy. Given our current situation, the long artlet tradition lives on as we open the event to the public through a virtual webinar format. Welcome to the 32nd Confucian Night, Confucianism and Beyond.
Well, that is an insightful video from the history of our Confucian Night. Now, for our first speaker for this evening, Christine Abigail L. Tan, PhD, took her bachelor's degree and master's in arts and philosophy degree here at the University of Santo Tomas, Manila. Meanwhile, she took her degree in philosophy at the Nanyang Technological University in Singapore. Dr. Tan has made numerous publications in different academic journals. She contributed multifarious articles in journals like the Critique, Fudan University Press, and the Monumenta Serica Journal of Oriental Studies, to name but a few. Currently, Dr. Tan is teaching in her capacity as a part-time instructor here at the University of Santo Tomas, handling classes in classic logic, Chinese philosophy, and philosophical problems and critical thinking. She is also teaching philosophy of religion at the Ateneo de Manila University in Quezon City. Besides the two universities, she has pedagogical experiences from her many teaching and academic experiences at the National University, AMA University, and the Nanyang Technological University. It is without a doubt that this pedagogical experience and philosophico-academic wisdom is something that Dr. Christine Tan would graciously imbue us with as we listen to her talk this evening. So without further ado, we introduce and call upon Dr. Christine Abigail L. Tan. Dr. Tan.
Hi, first of all, I'd like to thank Sir Peter Mara for inviting me to give a talk and for continuing the tradition of Confucian Night. So I'm now going to share my presentation, and the title of my presentation would be Li as Ziran in the Analects, Spontaneity in the Ritualized Self. So it is often easy to see Li, or ritual and propriety, as the most artificial or even pretentious of Confucian virtues. Indeed, it is the very virtue that is responsible for social hierarchy, government bureaucracy, and even unreasonably extravagant traditions of weddings and burials in Chinese culture, primarily attributed to the impression of Li as the reason for cultural continuity and hence inflexibility. As such, it is one of the most vulnerable angles from which the Ruists, or Confucians, receive criticism. A famous classical painting itself, entitled The Vinegar Tasters, portrays Confucius as a man who felt the world to be sour. Because he saw man as a moral project that ought to be undertaken, the painting portrayed him as someone who mostly felt discontent towards the world, and in the meantime, the Buddha was portrayed as someone who saw the world as bitter, full of pain and suffering, while Lao Tzu was portrayed as smiling because what he tasted was sweet, that is, the world being beautiful in its natural state. Yet, if we really dig deeper into the reasons for why such feeling of discontent was shared between Confucius and the Buddha, then we can understand that such feeling is really just the starting point of something that goes back into the core of what philosophy simply is: imagining the world as ought. In fact, it is not as if Lao Tzu never felt discontent, as he was dissatisfied that the world of his time had deviated from the Tao, the right path. Indeed, for Lao Tzu, we ought to go back to the natural state of the Tao, which is a state of original simplicity, as often viewed as antagonistic to where human constructions of rituals and traditions exist. It is, however, my claim today that, contrary to the popular opinion that rituals and traditions go against what is naturally so, Li is actually the height of spontaneity, or what we refer to as ziran, which is a concept that is most commonly associated with Taoism. Though what I can accomplish here is only a brief exposition of this sentiment, it is my hope that it somehow functions as a humble contribution to the larger notion that Confucianism and Taoism are not directly contradictory to each other. And that is significant because it is symptomatic of the tendency to feel the tendency for the it is symptomatic of the tendency for the ideal of it is symptomatic of the tendency for the ideal of harmony and holistic worldview that is Chinese philosophy as a whole espouses. Though I digress there, and that's a different topic altogether. Nevertheless, demonstrating that Li is indeed a practice that unifies, or that a practice that manifests rather Ziran, is no easy or simple task. As such, I proceed to present in two parts. The first of which will be a discussion on the notion of harmony in the Analects, that is, how the master views the relationship of man and his life world. And the second part will be a discussion of the spontaneous self as the ritualized self, who is able finally to assimilate himself with the function of the cosmos. That is to say, that it is the virtue of Li which helps man to position himself in the proper role, or where he ought to be, that is, as the moral embodiment of cosmic unity. In the Lunyu, we find that Confucius would continually emphasize that the interdependence of virtues involved one another in order for them to attain their fullness. This is why the master said that the gentleman is not a vessel. This is to say that the gentleman or nobleman is no specialist designed for a specific purpose. He, instead, is an embodiment of all virtues, which is also why the master said that virtue is never solitary. It always has its neighbors. Without going into detailed discussion of virtues, it would suffice for our purposes here to say that each virtue cannot be fully practiced without cultivating the others. Ren, or benevolence, for instance, finds no expression without knowing what is moral as is prescribed by Yi, or righteousness. Nor can it be properly addressed or expressed without knowing the proper, dignified instrument through which Ren may be practiced. Only thus, through the intermingling and simultaneous practice of several virtues, can inner harmony be achieved. And it is in this virtue of Li, by means of its dependence on the other virtues as cultural expression, that one can precisely be able to harmonize one's inner virtue. This harmony, of course, is focused on the harmonization of inner virtue, but only because the end goal is to harmonize the world as well. Indeed, the Confucian emphasis on harmony seeks to cultivate virtue in order to transform humanity towards a harmonious state. This is why the master said, and I quote, "One who rules through power of virtue is analogous to the pole star. It simply remains in its place and receives it simply remains in its place and receives the homage of the myriad lesser stars." In other words, we find in the Lunyu how harmony is the inner calm of one's virtue, is the inner calm. So sorry. In other words, we find in the Lunyu how harmony is the inner calm of one's virtue in order to be able to command external harmony. This understanding of harmony, however, can perhaps be seen the most in the most concrete sense when we look at the Confucian doctrine of Zhengming, or the rectification of names, wherein the harmonization of virtues is raised to the level of community in that each and every member contributes to the workings of society. The Confucian conception of harmony, thus, is an internal oughtness for the sake of externalizing it. As a state of mind, it becomes a necessary prerequisite in order to achieve the Confucian ideal of a harmonious state, and ultimately the cosmos. Contrary to how Confucius is portrayed in the Vinegar Tasters, as we have seen earlier, his dissatisfaction is not of the world as he saw it. Instead, it was not too different from that of Lao Tzu, being that men of the time have forgotten Tao, and as a result, caused disharmony. Indeed, according to Cheng Zhongying, the Confucian system is an organic unity in such a way that the superior man in such a way that the system is filled with appropriate roles for appropriate persons, so that even in his virtues, the superior man lives in harmony. He raises this to the metaphysical level and says, and I quote, "I call the Tao the supreme harmony because the Confucian conception of the Tao is the conception of a total order in which everything and every person under heaven will have its or his his proper place, in the proper time, in the totality of all places and all times. And all things and all persons form as relationship of mutual support and complementation, so that an organic unity results." If we look at the Analects, moreover, we will see that the virtue needed in order to achieve this is that of Li. As the text says, When it comes to the practice of ritual, it is harmonious ease that is to be valued. It is precisely such harmony that makes the way of the former kings so beautiful. It is precisely such harmony that makes the way of the former kings so beautiful. If you merely stick rigidly to ritual in all matters, great and small, there will remain that which you cannot accomplish. Yet if you know enough to value harmonious ease, but try to attain it without being regulated by the rites, this will not work either. So in this passage, it becomes obvious that Li is seen as responsible for the virtue of harmony, which is the Tao of the former kings. That is the appropriate Tao of society and the cosmos, as is also claimed by Cheng. The master warns, however, that Li must be flexible in accordance with harmony, or as Edward Slingerland puts it, harmonious ease. Pertinent to our purpose today, we must note, moreover, that the master is quick to remind us that harmony is possible only through the practice of Li, or rites, and anything other than this will not work. Thus, we are brought to see that the highest function of Li, as well as the very reason for its supreme significance, is that it brings about how the world ought to be. That is, its natural and original harmonious state. Such natural and harmonious state of man, however, does not mean one can simply follow whatever one desires at any moment in time. The paradox here lies in the fact that it actually takes effort in order to achieve supreme effortlessness or ziran. This, however, is not something that is entirely unheard of nor innovative at the time, as it is simply a facet of a principle that is more commonly known as 无忌必翻, or um, when things are pushed to their extremes, they reverse into the opposite. And this is a concept that is present even in the Lao Tzu and can be traced back to as early as the I Ching or the Book of Changes. It is this very same concept that is at work in the famous passage in the Analects when referring to Confucius' autobiography. So he says that at 15, I set my mind upon learning. At 30, I took my place in society. At 40, I became free of doubts. At 50, I understood heaven's mandate. At 60, my ears were attuned. At 70, I could follow my heart's desires without overstepping the bounds of propriety. Now, this is something that's famous in Confucian philosophy, and it's a famous passage in Confucian philosophy, and we would see this develop more sophisticatedly later on in the Mencius and Wang Yangming. So it is thus apparent in this passage how at the end of the journey that is self-cultivation, Li or ritual and propriety becomes one with the wishes of one's perfected sin or inner mind. As such, we see a complete harmony, not only between one's private life and public life, but also between the seemingly opposing functions of society and nature as well. Again, however, this can only be achieved through maximum effort and without the deliberate consciousness of making an effort to learn their rights. Then, this harmonious ease and spontaneous unity of oneself with the entirety of the cosmos and the humans in it cannot be attained. It is only when one becomes so acculturated with rights and social norms that one is able to understand them by heart, that one can act spontaneously and still be able to do what is right and in accordance with the virtues. This is because it is only through Li that one can take upon his proper role in the world, and only in taking one's proper role in the universe or in the cosmos can one be unified with society and ultimately nature. So, in conclusion, I would like to ponder on the question of what it means to be human, especially in today's current situation. And in light of what we have discussed regarding the role of practicing and learning the rites in reaching the height of the self's spontaneous moral agency. This is because learning really means to be human is the very threshold of what is both natural and superficial, uncarved and the adorned. One might think, what is there to learn about something that is already a given, something already there? Aren't we, after all, already always human to begin with? But to understand this fully, one must understand in terms of putting an effort into becoming effortless. And that ultimately is what rituals teach us to do. After all, the very substance and root of being oneself is simply to find one's very own humanity. Therefore, to ritualize oneself is to set one's heart on the ways of the world and the proper functions of the myriad things. In other words, to remember one's very own role and task, becoming who one is meant to be, which is none other than to be human. Before I end, however, I'd like to mention something that relates to our current situation. In Chinese medicine and the I Ching, or the Book of Changes, humans are a microcosm of the cosmos. So if something wrong happens in the cosmos, just as with the body, that is a sign that there is something wrong with its norms or system, just as in society. So just as with the body, a disease is caused by one's bad habits or practices, at least in Chinese metaphysics and ontology. So therefore, if something wrong happens in the world, if a crisis comes up, then it is a call to reassess our priorities and hence practices. In other words, it is important to remember that norms in themselves are never fixed. They need to be constantly reassessed to make sure that they are in parallel to what makes us human. That is, Ren, Yi, and Li in our current moment in time. Thank you for listening to my talk. That is all. And I now give the floor back.
Uh, Thank you, Dr. Tan. That is an absolutely outstanding lecture from Dr. Tan. Don't you think, Walden?
That's right, Kian. What an informative and detailed lecture from our Dr. Tan. Indeed, the concept of spontaneity and ritualized self can be achieved through our actions of rites, li, and proper conduct rites. It is by learning what it truly means to be human in both natural and superficial, the uncarved and the adorned ways of humanity. Now, before we move on to our second lecture for tonight, let's first have a icebreaker game. Um, but first, don't forget to use our hashtag for tonight, Confucian Night 2020. And so, um, the game tonight is simple. Um, we will going to flash on the screen right now some trivia questions about Confucius, and whoever gets it right will win a prize later after this event. So let's begin.
All right, I think everyone's ready. So here is our first question. The first question is a very easy one. When is Confucius' birthday? Is it A, October 3, B. September 24, C. September 28, or D. October 1? So, when is Kong's birthday? A. October 3, B. September 24, C. September 28, or D. October 1? Okay, guys, comment your answers down below. Okay, I can see people answer.
Okay, Kian, what is our first, who is our first pick? Whose answer will be a picking?
Now, we will choose na. Mukhang marami. Okay. Uh, the answer is letter C. So, for those who answered letter C,
Yes.
whoever got it first, we will see later on sa comment section, and then we will pick who is the winner. Now, Kyle, what is our second question?
Okay, so our second question is about this. What is the book that was attributed to Kong Tzu? Letter A, Lun Yu. Letter B, Lin Yu. Letter C, Lin Yi. Or letter D, Lun Yi. Again, let me repeat the question. The book that was attributed to Kong Tzu. Letter A, Lun Yu. Letter B, Lin Yu. C, Lin Yi. Letter D, Lun Yi. So comment your answers.
All right. Uh, are we seeing answers from our audiences? Ah, yes. Okay. For our third question for tonight, uh, what is Kong's age when he died? So is it letter A 70, letter B 71, letter C 72, or letter D 73? What age did Kongsu die? A 70, B 71, C 72, or B 73? What about our second? Uh, is this our our fourth question?
Okay, Kian, our fourth question goes, what was the place that Conti grew up in? A. Zuyi, letter B. Ziyu, letter C. Ziyi, or letter D. Zuyu. Again, what was the place that Conti grew up in? Letter A. Zuyi, letter B. Ziyu, letter C. Ziyi, letter D. Zuyu.
That is right. Now, for those who are answered, we will be viewing those uh, for a meanwhile, and then we will post later on who got the correct answer and who got it first. So now,
Yes.
I think uh, I will now give the floor to my partner to get this event running again.
Okay. Thank you again, Kian Pobleo. Now, to move over, let's now introduce our second speaker.
Okay, yes, now, well, then we are on our second lecture to be discussed by a Tomasian fried as well. And again, I am giving it to you so you can give us a brief introduction to our second speaker.
Yes, Kian, thank you. Our second speaker in this evening took his bachelor's degree cum laude and his master's in philosophy, also here at the University of Santo Tomas, year 2009 to 2016. He is once an advanced PhD exchange student at the College of Humanities of Xiamen University and SIMI campus, and was also a visiting graduate student at the Department of Comparative Literature and Languages of University of California, Riverside. Sir Cabral also made numerous publications in different academic journals. He contributed multifarious articles in journals like Taoism and the German Mission in Martin Heidegger's The Thing, Frontiers of Philosophy in China, and in his recent contribution to the university's publishing house at the editorial staff of the book project entitled Doing Philosophy in the Philippines. The Tomasian Collection, year 1924 to 1949. Sir Cabural is also not just an avid participant of conferences and workshops, but an ardent research based presenter as well. Just last April of present year 2020, Sir Cabural presented a group meeting for a paper at the University of California entitled Cicero and Wang Chong in their Critique of Divination. Sir Cabural was also a contestant, recipient, and finalist of the Hong Kong University of Science and Technology 3-minute thesis competition last 2018. He is also a former assistant
Hello, good evening.
Yes, sir. Currently, Mr. Kabural, as you are seeing right now, is working on his dissertation paper entitled Marcus Tullius Cicero and Wang Chong on Divination, Fortuna, Fatum, and Me, Lessons from the Past, for the Present, and for the Future. As he is a candidate for PhD in Humanities and Social Sciences at the Hong Kong University of Science and Technology. No, and now, with all these achievements, it is with no doubt that this brilliance could also be shared with us tonight. So, without further ado, it is with my great and outstanding pleasure to welcome our second speaker, Mark Kevin S. Cabural, PhD candidate. Sir,
Thank you very much, Walden, for the very generous introduction. And let me first thank Mr. Sir Peter Mara for organizing this event and for inviting me to give a lecture. So this paper is actually, I should say, an improved version of my presentation during the World Congress of Philosophy in Beijing last 2018. And I tweak a little bit of the title. So the title for now is Tung Chung Shu and Han Confucianism. And to be more particular, I'm going to talk about the Eastern Han, or I mean the Western Han, or the former Han, or the earlier Han period. This distinction, I think, is important because later on I'm going to allude to a thinker in the Eastern Han period, the thinker that I'm actually working on for my dissertation, who is Wang Chong. So he reacted a lot to Tung Chung Shu. So I think I have to make that distinction. So let me share now my my PPT. So here. Okay. Here you go. Application window here. Okay. So here, Tung Chung Shu and Han Confucianism. Let me begin with a short note about his life. So we are fortunate because we have information coming from two credible sources. First, we have the biographies of Confucian scholars in the Shiji and the biography of Tung Chung Shu in the Hanshu. And these are the things that I wanted to emphasize. He was born sometime around 195 BCE, and he was a native of the kingdom of Guanchuan of the present-day Hebei province. So he is known for his interpretation of anomalies and disasters, and this is deeply related to the notion of the unity between heaven and humanity, or what we call as the Tianren He. And this prompted, or this gained him the reputation from our scholars of our time to label him as a phenomenalist, or a correlative cosmologist, or correlative anthropocosmologist, or a thinker of systematic correspondence. So just to give you a background for this one, so Tung Chung Shu is actually a follower of Zhou Yan, for instance, naturalism, a Chinese naturalist thinker. So this concept of the Tianren He is that heaven actually has a direct relation with human in such a way that human also has a direct relation with heaven. So there is some kind of correspondence between the two. And this explains also why there are such anomalies or disasters, because these are messages or warnings coming from heaven, and these are expressed to humans. And this also explains one of his controversies. There are actually two controversies that are famous in Tung Chung Shu, but I'm going to discuss only one. So the first controversy is that on his interpretation of the two fire incidents as a message or warning from heaven. And he was exposed by an official named Chu Fuyan. And this is the reason why this almost cost his life. So he was basically sanctioned with death penalty. It's because of his interpretation that those two fire incidents that happened were actually warning from heaven. So yeah, let me continue here. So Tung Chung-shu and his Confucian reputation. While it remains debatable if Tung Chung-shu is responsible for the foundation of Han Confucianism that even persisted in the later times, it is commonly accepted that he exhibits the reputation of being a Confucian scholar. So I think there is no question about that. He is a Confucian scholar. And one of the proofs is that even in the historical records by Sima Chen, he was considered as a Confucian scholar. I mean, his biography is included in that category. Sarah Quinn, for instance, argued that his deference for the past and a veneration for the writings of Confucius made Tung a Confucian scholar, and this further helped him shape the fundamental contours of the traditional Chinese state. That is why he also gained the reputation, I mean, Tung Chung-shu gained the reputation that he was instrumental in, in China as having a Confucian state during that time. In the same regard, another scholar, Michael Lowy, noted that certain elements that are seen later as features of Confucianism, as opposed to other systems or doctrines, are recently to be found in some of Tung's writings, such as the three responses. So I'm going to touch on these three responses later on in passing. Recently, there appeared the complete translation, the first complete translation of the text attributed to Tung. And this is entitled as the Chun Chu Fan Lu, or the Luxuriant Gems of the Spring and Autumn. Albeit controversial regarding its origin and authorship, I would like to assess its reputation as a text influenced or informed by Confucianism. In particular, my aim here is to emphasize the Confucian notion of run as it is appropriated in the aforementioned text. There are certainly other Confucian notions that can be emphasized and employed in the process, but the notion of run is a central idea to the master that is necessary in understanding and embodying the Confucian ideals. In here, I offer the interpretation that the luxuriant gems of the spring and autumns, chapters, chapters 29, 30, and 31, appropriate the Confucian notion of run. So in total, there are actually 81 chapters or 81 pien of this voluminous work, but I'm just focusing on these three main chapters because it is in these chapters that you can actually see the concept of run. These chapters offer a discussion in being humane and righteous. Humane here is the run, and righteous here is the virtue of E, as proper conducts of the self in dealing with his own self, and at the same time for the self in dealing with others. With regard to the origin of these chapters, so the translators noted that chapter 30, that is the section 2 of, particularly the section 2 of that chapter, was written by Tung. But the other chapters and the other parts were either written by Tung or members of his immediate circle or the first generation of disciples. So I think there is no controversy about this text being the text that I'm using, the chapters that I'm using. It is because in one way or another, it was written by him or it was appropriated by his students and it referred to his teachings. Now, I have here a slight digression, and I want to discuss about the syncretism of Tung Chung Shu, because even if we think that he is a Confucian, there are also parts or elements wherein we can see other doctrines that are present in his thought. And basically, I have here the concept of the yin yang, the concept of the wuxing. So when we talk about the yin yang, it originally represented the bright and shady parts of the mountain, but during the mid-late Zhou period and it achieved maturity during the Han times, these two were taken already as cosmic principles. And basically, Tung Chung Shu is one of the thinkers who talk about the yin yang as cosmic principles. And we also have here the concept of the wuxing, or the five elements or five phases. And this represents the generation and cycle of major elements of the universe. So basically, if we try to assess these concepts, they are not purely Confucian, but these are also used by other schools of thought. So like when we talk about the yin yang, we have the yin yang school. And wuxing is basically introduced by Zhou Yan, who is considered to be the greatest representative of the Inyang school. And of course, this syncretism is to be understood that there is also Confucian teaching, and that is the main thing that I'm gonna focus in this talk in Tungchung Shu. Now, enough of that digression. So let me talk more about the one note about this digression. I think I agree with Paul and Schuld, who talk about the syncretism or eclecticism of the thinkers um, during the Han period and afterwards. Like this is not only an issue on Tungchung Shu, but basically this also is an issue with the later thinkers, for instance, Wang Chong in the Eastern Han, and of course also Wang Bi. Um, they are in a way syncretic, or they are in a way eclectic. They are they have a lot of ideas that come from different schools of thought that are prevailing in that society. So what did Paul Unschild say about this issue? So he said, and I quote, the unique feature of the Chinese situation, and this should receive more attention from historians and philosophers of science, is the continuous tendency toward a syncretism of all ideas that exist within accepted limits. Somehow, a way was always found in China to reconcile opposing views and to build bridges, fragile as they may appear to the outside observer, permitting thinkers and practitioners to employ liberally all the concept available as long as they were not regarded as destructive to society. So what we can learn here is that they actually try to be practical in arrogating all these different concepts from different schools of thought. It is because I think the problem that they are trying to face is more effectively solved if you are not just simply coming from a particular school of thought, but you tend to arrogate the other ideas of other schools of thought. Now, let me go now to the second part of my talk, and that is the concept of humaneness and righteousness, or Ren and Yi. In situating Tung's historical and intellectual position in the Han times, Michael Lowy identified three major questions that arose during the period, which he argued that Tung was aware of, and again he pointed out the three responses as his evidence. With questions such as the legitimacy of the dynasty, so that is one of the question, and then the sources and influences of their current imperial practices, and the absence of standards in the practice of sovereignty, he noted that Tung's reaction was to cite Kongzi with greater regularity and persistence than that seen in other writings of the time. So one of the rival school of thought, it's not surprising, is actually Taoism. For instance, the emperor before the existence of Tung is Emperor Jing, and the Han Emperor Jing, and basically he's an avid follower of the Taoist arts, and at the same time, like for instance, to be more particular, Lao Tzu and the Yellow Emperor. Now, in other words, Tung's attitude is to refer to the Confucian classics, and this also amounts to considering the past as basic and necessary means of learning which can be emulated accordingly. Apparently, Tung is admired for having mastered the classic texts Spring and Autumn by following the Kungyang commentary and the interpretations of Chao. So this is basically a technical thing, but we have to understand that he was an erudite of a particular interpretation of the Spring and Autumn. Moreover, alluding to the major questions during the Han times, the three questions that concern human relations and organization, Tung referred to the looks to the spring and autumn, and he actually referred to this, and this actually he used this one to open the chapter 29 of his text, which he says that the luxuriant the spring and autumn is a seminal text which brings order to others and the self. So he tried to beautifully phrase this one, that the spring and autumn is a seminal text which brings order to others and the self. Tung keenly recalls from the classic text the conceptual pair humaneness and righteousness as the very means in bringing order to others and the self. They provide standards of the self in dealing with his own self and at the same time for the self in dealing with others. Succinctly, they are expressed in the following: the standard of humaneness lies in loving others, not in loving the self, and the standard of righteousness lies in correcting the self, not in correcting others. Moreover, it is important to emphasize here that in both concepts, humanness and righteousness, the distinction between the self and the others is basically they emphasize the distinction between the self and the others in order to prevent the tendencies of treating the other as the self or treating the self as the other, which cause disorder in human relationships and organizations. Although humaneness is a term that refers to others and righteousness is a term that refers to the self, these standards tend to emphasize more on the crucial role of the self. So I think I am reminded here, for instance, of Professor Alfredo Kohl's usual question in his Chinese philosophy class. He throws the question about Confucianism as either being selfish or being egoistic, which I think I have to answer that it's not actually selfish, which should be the answer, by the way. But yeah, he can be egoistic in the sense that this kind of ethics refers to the self, not on the other, because although you put the element of the other there, you will always have in the end to refer to the self. So in that way, it become egoistic. So I'm not using the term egoistic here because the term egoistic, I have to point out, is also heavily loaded in the Western world. Um, I have to say that when I use the term here, egoistic, is that I simply mean that we refer to the self. There is a heavy reference to the self. Now, as the reference point, the self is determined to possess autonomy in the pursuit of order and the others are modestly passive. But since the dichotomy between the self and the others is merely relevant in establishing references, which means that others are primarily selves in their own, everyone actually shares the same kind of autonomy in the pursuit of order. But then, why is it in the vantage point of the self, the others are modestly passive, which then requires the self to simply use humanness in order to pacify others? It was stated that the nobleman brought order to the external, relying on generous regulations to embrace the multitudes. The external simply refers to the many and diverse others who are not totally disclosed, nor it is fully accessible from the vantage point of the self. So the self only knows what is manifest in others, and this makes it impossible for the self to demand and impose something upon others. Instead, the self simply proceeds in being humane, which means to earnestly and sincerely love others and are respectfully and unharmoniously uncontentious. End of quote. There is, moreover, another notion that compensates the leniency of the standard of humaneness, because that is one of the criticism. Is it just a very lenient concept? And the text states that if humaneness is the means to love humankind, wisdom is the means to rid them of harm. Wisdom, in this sense, suggests that there are situations which require the self to be more active in their approach toward others. So, when you are equipped with wisdom, the self may prohibit and influence others who are in danger of incurring any harm. Tung or his disciples describe this kind of wisdom in the following: the wise discern calamity and fortune from a distance and know benefit and harm early on. So, this passage is basically one of the passages that refer to Tung Chung-shu and his belief on divination. So there is actually a prominent school, not really a school of thought, but basically a certain classification during this period, call it as the Chinwei, and these are all about the divinatory texts. And one of the texts was written by Tung Chung-shu, but unfortunately, it's already lost. It's called as the Chunchu Inyang. So it's like a divinatory manual wherein it states how to interpret omens, how to interpret calamities and sort of that. Now, in another thing, this means also that wisdom is not a readily available thing. That is, it is not innate, but it belongs to the potentialities of all humans or all selves. It requires experience together with a form of understanding that is able to recognize the implications of various happenings that may contribute to future events. So, in brief, wisdom intensifies the standard of humaneness, for it provides a source in manifesting love and respect towards others. Now, I have a simple digression here. Um, Actually, the term wisdom here is synonymous with the Latin term prudentia. So, Tung Chung Shu is basically a believer of divination, and we have Cicero on the West on approximately the same time, wherein he has this concept of prudentia, and this concept of prudentia is like this wisdom because prudentia is the knowledge of the event of the past that is connected to the present and also to the future. So it's like this wisdom in Tung Chung Shu. Prudentia is also a kind of a moral wisdom, so to speak. Now, in contrast to humaneness, Tung stated that the people who are fond of righteousness are said to like themselves, whereas people who are not fond of righteousness are said to dislike themselves. The liking of the self, as it is appropriated here, does not equate the hedonistic ideal of giving all the possible pleasures to oneself, but it lies in rectification of the self, in rectifying the self. So when you talk about liking the self here, it's not like the hedonistic ideal, but it's a matter of rectifying oneself, making it's the pursuit of goodness. This standard practically asserts the very idea of constantly perfecting oneself, which is arguably a difficult task. However, the self is not left alone entirely since it obtains a generous source from heaven during the process. It was noted that in giving birth to people, heaven sustains them by giving birth to righteous principles and material benefits. Material benefits to nourish their bodies, righteous principles to nourish their hearts. This explains why righteousness does not refer to rectifying others, because all are actually equally blessed by heaven. It follows that we are all equally given the opportunity to transform our benefits to our own advantage. Now, I want to emphasize here the concept of heaven or the concept of Tian, and this because this is one of the pervading concepts in Chinese culture, Chinese philosophy, Chinese literature. So when we talk about the concept of Tian, it may mean to understand nature. It can also mean it can also mean a moral law and also a universal law. When I talk about universal law, for instance, we can refer to the Tao Te Ching, like it says that the heaven patterns it from the Tao, and in here it seems it is the case that the Tao is becomes the universal principle of heaven. But in the case of Tung Chung Shu, I think that he used that concept of Tian in the two ways. When we talk about the material benefits, I think he is talking about nature as in the physical nature. And when we talk about the righteous principles, I think he is talking about here heaven as a moral law. It's not something that is distinct in his writings, but this heaven as a moral law can already be seen in Mencius, for instance. Now, moreover, the standard of righteousness does not merely stress the rectification of the self, it also highlights an ideal society. Since society is composed of many and diverse selves, it entails that social order begins with the self. This is the internal when it is stated that, and I quote, the noble man brought order to the internal by reverting to proper principles to rectify the self. Hence, it is but proper that before the self interacts with others, that is, the internal interacts with the external, the self must already know how to maintain order and follow what is right. So it's like, a Lego thing that if you cannot rectify yourself, it's so difficult that you can actually see a society that is rectified. So it starts with the self. That is, I think, the main point here. Now, let me go to the next part: humaneness, righteousness, and the Confucian notion of Ren. The standard of humaneness and righteousness converge with the Confucian notion of run in three instances. First, in affirming the fundamental condition of the self as relational and the fundamental relationship between the self and others. Second, the self as safe capable in the pursuit of goodness. And third, in the approach with a high moral character. All of this, and this is the main point of my presentation, attests to the Confucian reputation of the luxuriant gems of the spring and autumn, or the text that is associated to Tung Chung Shu. The Confucian notion of Ren, arguably the most important among the five virtues, or the Wu Chang, provides a basis for understanding the notions of the self and the other. Despite the extensive number of translation of this concept, I would like to adopt the translation of Professor Emeritus Alfredo Ko, where he translated this concept as the consciousness of human others. This translation, I would suggest, clearly captures the fundamental condition of the self as relational, which posits its non isolation or not being alone. Apparently, the Confucian notion of the self is a consequence of others and vice versa. While the self is regarded as the self because there is another self who relates as the other is regarded as the other because there is another other who relates as the self. In the case of Tung, the two standards in tandem imply that humans are primarily selves in their own, but when interacting with other selves, they can be both the self and the other. Hence, there is proper conduct when humans simply refer to their own selves as in the standard of righteousness, and when they interact with others as in the standard of humanness. In addition to the fundamental condition of the self as relational, Ren also affirms the self's capability of doing what is good, and it also acknowledges the self's tendency toward evil. For this very reason, Confucius reminded and encouraged humans with the following: merely set your heart sincerely upon goodness, and you will be free of bad intentions. Professor Yu Dan interpreted and called this as the approach with a high moral character, which entails that the self needs to face all situation and others calmly, with fair-mindedness, justice, openness, and uprightness. This ideal implies that the self understands the fact that not all times goodness is repaid with goodness and that the self needs to maintain doing the good despite the evil that could be experienced. In a nutshell, Run therefore envisions the moral self, that is, the self who adheres to the ideal of a high moral character, exhibits self capability, autonomy, endurance, consistency, or independence, making the self as the master of his own and not simply living on the opinion of others. In the case of Tung, the standard of righteousness emphasizes that the self is not without flaws, but like the notion of Run, it also affirms that it can rectify itself and thereafter do what is good. It is indeed true that heaven assists the self, but like the seeds in a barren land that do not prosper, the benefits of heaven will falter without the self's effort. Moreover, the pursuit of goodness does not only concern and affect one's own self, it also benefits others, as the standard of humanness suggests. Wisdom empowers the self to assume responsibility of or over others. He may either tolerate or prohibit the other due to possible foreseen danger. The other, in response, may either consider the prohibition or simply disregard it. And like the approach with a high moral character, the concerned self or the one who adheres to the standard of humaneness and is equipped with wisdom need not to worry about the other who disregarded the prohibition because what is essential is the desire and fulfillment to do good on the other. Now, let me now go to my epilogue. This is already the last part of my presentation, and I'll talk about humanness, righteousness, and learning to be human. Thus, the question, with the standards of humanness and righteousness in tandem, what can it possibly contribute in illuminating the inquiry on learning to be human, which is truly a timeless and timely concern? The standards of humanness and righteousness strongly emphasize the significance of self awareness, human relationships and society, and the various sources that may influence different events that may concern the self and others. This claim justifies why these standards, particularly during the ancient times and was revived in Tung's time, have been considered in understanding not only in the discourse of ethics or morality, but in politics as well. What we can learn then from these standards in tandem is its promotion of order, maybe harmony. Order in this regard suggests that the different elements in question not only create order among them, but these very elements must achieve order as well in their very own. And here I refer to that these standards entail four different orders: order within the self, as in the idea of righteousness; order between the self and the other, as in the idea of humaneness; order that is inspired by nature or the world, as the idea of wisdom presupposes; and ultimately, the order of the self, others, and the world. In summary, Tung envisions that in the pursuit of being human, one needs to be inclusive, that is, to consider or be sensitive not on the self alone, but also of others and the world. That is why we again go back to the concept of the Tian Ren He Yi, which is basically a very important one, where it talks about the correlative cosmology or correlative anthropocosmology, which is basically important concept in Tung. Now, meanwhile, we are currently facing a crisis which basically affects everyone, and we may want to rethink again our roles as self and other. I want you to pay attention to this slogan about the simple gesture of wearing masks. I think I'm really attracted how they try to phrase this one here in Hong Kong and maybe other places as well. Maybe they use this phrase as well, like protect ourselves and protect others. So they wanted to emphasize that we are all connected in this pandemic or in this current crisis that we are facing. We realize again that the moral duty that is brought about by the profound relation of the self and others. So, what I wanted to point out here is that in this current situation, we are again reminded, we realize again that we have our moral duty, not just on ourselves, but also to others. And yeah, thank you very much for listening to this talk. And this paper was presented, as I mentioned earlier, during the World Congress of Philosophy. So it's I just want you to show you this photo of the group. I mean, these are from UST in Manila, and I really had a good time with them to get during the World Congress. And again, maraming salamat, Fei Chang Ganshe Niman.
Yes, thank you again, Sir Kabural, for that very inspiring and very insightful and as well explained disquisition. Now, Kian,
All right, the two lectures from Dr. Tan and Sir Kabural are indeed excellent. Lucidly presented, it allows us ever to understand the great Oriental concepts from ancient China. I must say that Dr. Tan's lecture on Li as Jiran really exemplifies the beyond in this year's Confucianism and beyond.
yes, same thoughts, Kian. Humanness, spontaneity, righteousness, and learning to be human in our ritualized self are the key concepts that the two speakers taught us
Yes.
this evening. Now, as the two speakers have already shared their knowledge and mastery about more of the Confucianism, let's hear it from our audience as well, our viewers now. Okay, so now let me have a comment or ask what should I call this Q&A question for our speakers, for our both our speakers for tonight. So uh, what will happen is that we're going each of our questions will be viewed by us, and we're going to pick few of your questions, and both speakers will answer it. Don't be shy and just put your questions down there in the comment section. And
Yes.
whoever will be the ones who, or the questions that we'll be picking, will surely be rewarded afterwards. So let's begin.
Okay.
Kian.
Uh, where are we are waiting for your comments, for your questions, for our speakers. Don't be shy, guys, to post your questions for our speakers. I'm sure they
Okay, we
will.
already
Ano?
have this
Question.
first question,
Ah,
Kian.
we have our first question.
Okay, our first question is from Maricris R. Panglinan. The question is for Sir Casey Kabura. How did the values of reciprocity and humanness have been a response to the life in China in the Warring State period? Question for, okay, so let me first answer that, Mr. Kabural.
Yes, thank you very much. Um, the values of reciprocity and humaneness, I think we can answer this one via a historical understanding of how Chinese philosophy emerged. So it's true that it emerged during the Warring States period, and basically, accounts here describe that it's full of selfishness, political selfishness, moral selfishness. We can talk about here the selfishness, and I think the value of reciprocity and humaneness here is basically a response towards that. It was successful. It's basically a different issue, you know. So I think I should put it that way. Like it should this concept is a response to that emerging problem, you know, to that problem of selfishness, whether moral selfishness, political selfishness, economic selfishness, etc.
Okay, so I hope that question answered. Okay, so for our next question, she has a follow-up question now for Dr. Tan. How did the ideas of the Analects differ from the Western ideas?
Dr. Tan. There.
Hi, okay, so thank you for that question. Maybe it's not really that different, or because I don't know. There are many Western ideas as well, but um, it's often compared, Confucianism is often compared to Aristotelian virtue ethics, and it's similar to that in a in such a way that you have these fixed virtues, but those virtues can differ over different contexts and circumstances as well. But I guess the main difference here, which you can see in Confucianism as well as in different schools of thought in Chinese philosophy, and Casey has highlighted this as well, is the emphasis on the value of harmony. So the value of or the kind of priority and significance that we put in harmony is different with the priority or the significant values that you see in the West, for example, freedom, right? And you can see that difference in how different governments handle the current pandemic. So, yeah, I guess that is the main difference.
All right, thank you, Dr. Tan. And thank you as well, Marquise, for that questions. And for our second question, Kian,
Okay, it's from Alex Nicholas Lim. This is for kay Dr. Tan as well. I have a question addressed to the idea that Li is Jiran. Is Confucianism Taoist or is it the other way around? Dr. Tan.
Yeah, hi Alex. Well, I think the point is that Confucianism and Taoism are not mutually exclusive, or they don't necessarily have to be mutually exclusive. And you can see this after the Warring States period more clearly. And Casey has also highlighted this as well, that there are many ideas of syncretism after, and you actually don't see that distinction until the Han period. So you don't see them categorizing, oh, I'm a Confucian, so I'm gonna talk about this, and I'm a Taoist, so I'm gonna talk about this. So those kinds of distinctions really didn't exist as such during the warring states, and it's later scholars who gave them those categories. So yeah, I just wanted to highlight the fact that you don't necessarily have to categorize them as monolithic, these schools. They have different ideas that vary and that take from each other, that are similar to each other as well.
Thank you very much, Dr. Tan. Uh, do you have any more question? Okay. Oh, Kyle, we have
Okay.
another question.
Okay. Our third question would be from Lobream. Do you think that Confucianism principle, especially like how Kong Tu himself conceptualized them, has a place in Philippine society? So it doesn't have any or anyone. So whoever can answer it, sir. Um,
Yes. Yeah, that's a tough question to be honest, although it appears simple, you know. But I think, of course, we can actually arrogate these Confucian principles, especially if we talk about problems that are rooted on selfishness. And again, I emphasize that the problem on selfishness, wherein we only focus on ourselves. And in that way, I think we can actually arrogate the Confucian principles, especially the five virtues, in order for us to, solve this problem of selfishness and other problems as well. Um, I also would like to highlight that um, there is actually a translation of the Tao Te Ching in Filipino. I think there are two translations, and it is interesting that we can begin talking about Chinese philosophy in the Philippines by this translation. Of course, we also have to emphasize here the contributions of Professor Emeritus Alfredo Ko. But yeah, I mean, these are seminal things that we have already in talking about Chinese philosophy in general in the Philippines.
okay, thank you. What about your thoughts, Dr. Tan?
Yeah, I agree with Casey, and I think these ideas, especially when we're talking about philosophy, we can try to think about them in any context that we want, as long as we, stay faithful to the texts and try to think about them, try to think with the philosophers themselves. We can try to use them to solve different issues, and that includes the Philippine society.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you very much.
Kian for our last question.
Oh, for our last question, this is from Alanan Lozada Luel. Question to Sir Casey. I want to ask, why is it that essence of Ren become a moral obligation? Sir Casey.
Okay, so the notion of run is just one of the five concepts in the five Confucian virtues. And as I was arguing earlier, I think it is the most important among the five. Why so? It is because this concept let you realize that you are not alone, that basically there are others in this world, right? And if you wanted to be more environmentalist, these others can also be animals. We can talk about animal ethics. We can talk about the environment as well. So I think the important thing here is that when we talk about the run, it gives you the idea that you are not alone. Because if you are just alone in this world, right? I mean, morality will not be an issue because you can just be doing what you want. There will be no beneficiary, or there will be no other people or other beings who will basically suffer because of your action. But the reality here is that here is run. It tries to tell us that, hey, there are others. You have to be censured. The others are your moral censure. You have to do good because it's not only you who is living here. There are also others around you.
Yes, I
Thank you
agree.
very much, Sir Casey.
Okay, now I think this would be our last question from Herman Joseph Suhendra for both speakers. I wonder how Confucian Thoughts has something a lot to say about our current pandemic or worsening situation across the globe, or specifically how Confucian Thoughts may lead Asian countries to shape the future ahead for better picture of the humanity. Thank you for your enlightening insights. Okay, so it's a question, sir.
Should I answer first, Christine, or
Eh, yeah,
Yes,
go
sir.
ahead. Let's see.
I just want to emphasize, I think, the centrality of order in Confucianism. Okay? I think that is what is something we can get from Confucianism, more than, for instance, the emphasis of spontaneity of Taoism. But when we talk about Confucianism, I think the emphasis on order. That is why we gain interpretations in the contemporary in our time that Confucianism is not basically in line with, for instance, democracy because of its emphasis on order. I mean, there is a lot of interpretations on that, right? But I think what we can gather here is that we have to follow some orders, and we so that we can be in order. Okay, I should put it that way, and that is something that is emphasized in Confucianism.
Dr. Tan?
Yeah, I agree with the emphasis on order, although I would prefer the maybe harmony, the emphasis on the value of harmony. And again, I would like to go back, to the primary concern, to the primary value that you have in the West, for example, which would be, for example, freedom. So if you ask, for example, a Confucian, what is free will, or why are the question of freedom and moral responsibility, um, it wouldn't be a valuable, or it wouldn't be a significant, it would be a weird question to a Confucian, like if you are free to do what, if you are free actually, because if you're not really free to do something wrong, so that's not a value. Doing something wrong, the freedom to do something wrong is not, or should not be considered a value. We have to take into consideration that the values are something that should be good, and they have to result to good things, or they have to result in good things as well. So in Confucianism and in a lot of Chinese philosophical thoughts, harmony is emphasized. And this emphasis on harmony is also what leads to our emphasis on collective, kind of a collective collaboration rather than competition, rather. So I would put it that way. So here in the current crisis, you can see that really coming out, that when you emphasize or when you put importance on collaboration rather than competition, you can achieve things that you cannot achieve in competition.
Okay, for our next question, we have a lot of good questions from Emmanuel S. Encarnacion. Question for Dr. Tan. With Li being Jiran, does this perhaps only apply to the wisdom of Lao Tzu, or does it also include the Taoist tradition of those such as Chuang-Tzu? Dr. Tan.
Hi, thank you, Emmanuel, for that question. Yeah, I think I've only mentioned Lao Tzu because he's the founder of Taoism. But Ziran actually is more discussed in Chuang-Tzu. So yes, it applies to Chuang-Tzu. Lao Tzu actually emphasizes Wu or Wu Wei more, or non-action. So these two, of course, work together in Taoist thought. But yes, it also applies to Chuang-Tzu and the rest of all other Taoists that you have in Chinese philosophy.
Okay, so for the next question, it's from Paolo Pangaliban. Question for Dr. Tan again. I would just like to ask po, what is the role and significance of these Chinese philosophical concepts, Li, Ziran, Ren, in addressing this global crisis?
Yeah, I think we answered this earlier. The same question with Father Suhendra.
Let's see.
Yes.
Next question from John Luna for Dr. Tan again. Does the concept of Chiran have similarities with the Aristotelian concept of habit? Dr. Tan.
Well, in itself, probably not really. So you might be able to see some similarities here and there, but it's not very similar to, Ziran is not very similar to the Aristotelian concept of habit. But Confucian virtue ethics itself would be similar with the concept of habit, especially the concept of ENV, because you have to follow and repeat certain things in order to learn them by heart. Yeah.
Okay, this is from Kelly Louise Rexy Agra. It seems as though Confucian philosophy in general provides an idealistic ethical framework. What is your position on the ontological status of the idealized life and the society that Confucian philosophy outlines? Are they merely identity or are they idealizations, perhaps in the sense of some form of Kantian regulative ideas, or do you think that they actually be achieved? If it is in the latter, is there a place for the question of real conflict and disagreements when it comes to moral matters in Confucianism?
It is not addressed to anyone, so anyone can answer. Sir Casey, about you.
I'm rereading the question.
Okay, sir.
Okay.
Okay. Um, I think they can be achieved, but as I mentioned earlier, um, to be moral is a difficult thing. No. I mentioned it in my discussion a while ago. Regarding the question of conflict and disagreements when it comes to moral matters in Confucianism, I think this is something that we have to cross because for instance, when we talk about the run e li, or for instance, ritual li, these are basically very particular. These are cultural particulars, no? And in that sense, if we step up into the globalized world or into the more universal one, that can actually be a problem, right? But in a more global world now, like information is everywhere, we can easily transcend those things. I think we can actually surpass this conflict that we are going to first foresee, that we are going to encounter in applying this Confucian ideals. I think that's the main problem actually of Confucianism, because it has the side of being culturally specific or culturally particular. But I think because now we are more global, or I mean, information is everywhere. We can basically learn how these people live, how these people act. We can basically, it's easier for us to adjust on that.
Okay. So I think that would be our last question. Yes. So again, I'd just like to thank you all for the cooperation, participation, this Q&A portion of our seg- of our event.
Okay.
Kian,
Oh, yes. Thank you very much, Dr. Tan and Sir Caboral. Now, to give his inspirational speech for everyone, with great honor, we would like to call upon and introduce the man behind our great and rich tradition of Confucian Night, Professor Emeritus Dr. Alfredo Pico. Dr. Co.
Mok-
Could you hear me? Could the host hear me?
Uh, yes, Dr. Co.
Okay. Do I start? Do I start?
Dr. Ko.
Okay. I I'm happy that you're still continuing on with that tradition. What should a man almost turning 71 share with people attending an event that is turning 32? Perhaps some by historical note, anecdotal reference, memorable thoughts, and the idea of leaving a simple legacy that has allowed itself to take its own life. It is 1988, my 13th year of joining the Faculty of Arts and Letters, some 5 years into my handling Chinese philosophy in the university, that I initiated an academic conference crafted for senior students taking up Chinese philosophy. I imagined that an academic life that should be highlighted with a philosophical event that centers on philosophical forum, combined dinner lectures attended by students in Chinese philosophy. I called the philosophical dinner forum the Confucian Night. I stipulated the plantilia and encouraged the students to take responsibility for organizing an event with the following components: a formal lecture every 28th of September, a day considered as the birthday of Master Kong. The theme of the lecture should be around the theme on Confucianism. The event is to be handled by the philosophy and Asian studies students in their senior years in consultation with me, and the format will be in dinner lecture, and students were to attend the event in serious attire. As it turned out, when a valid idea was raised, it took its own wings, and when it gained support for the validity of its cause, it just flies high and continued on until today. Students took the event with great anticipation. When the semester starts, there were occasions when they would go wild to plan it in luxurious hotels and venues of the likes of Manila Hotel, Diamond Hotel, or some Chinese restaurants. There were times when students had to be tempted to make the event simple but memorable. But students would come to the event in their best, men in their suits and women in their gown or in their best cocktail formal attire. As time wore on, it gained recognition from other majors, and it did not take long when other important universities took notice of the event as one important forum for philosophy. Dignitaries and professors from other universities were invited to speak, and they took note of the grand academic forum in the Faculty of Arts and Letters. Tonight, this 32nd Confucian Night is unique in that it is being held in virtual form. It will forever be remembered as the first unsocial social event where you did not have the chance to come together in dinner and lecture forum format. But I trust that you are all here attending this with the same excitement and anticipation as before. In the 32nd year of its inception, various topics have been discussed and many scholars have graced the academic forum. But to the AS and Philo majors, it became an anticipated event in their senior year, akin to what some younger people would say a rite of passage in their graduation from the philosophy and Asian studies. Today, your 32nd Confucian Night is graced by some of my former students who themselves attended their respective Confucian Night as a student. But now they are taking the lead role in organizing tonight's event. Mr. Peter Mara was my student in Chinese philosophy some years ago. Miss Christine Abigail Tan and Mr. Mark Kevin Cabural were both my students and also of Peter Mara. How time flies indeed. I trust you all profited listening to them and enjoyed your evening, even if you are just having it in its most unsocial virtual form. It is my 45th year teaching in this university. And when I look back in time and see some events like this that are close to my heart, it is like gazing at eternity. And so I end my little message on the occasion of the 2571 birthday of Kongzi and the 32nd Confucian Night of the Faculty of Arts and Letters being celebrated by both the Asian Studies major and Philosophy major of the University of Santo Tomas. My warm felicitations and cheers to you all.
Uh, Thank you very much, Dr. Alfredo Ko, for that outstandingly inspiring speech. Your presence truly makes any Confucian Night ever rich. And even in our virtual Confucian Night this year, your mere presence makes it like any other Confucian Night, rich, grand, and truly philosophical. Thank you very much, Dr. Ko. Now, ladies and gentlemen, once again, on behalf of the University of Santo Tomas Department of Philosophy and the Asian Studies Society, we would like to give you our most sincere gratitude for attending and being with us in our 32nd Confucian Night. Nakamute ka, nakamute ka, nakamute ka na.
Okay, I'm so sorry. That's right, Kian, And as now we are bound to end this event, here are my top post learnings and realizations about these previous lectures that we've had, each with having a more and profound side of insights about Confucianism. Now we highlight self-awareness, human relationships, society, and the value of finding oneself amidst the verities of humanity.
Indeed, Kyle, our Confucian Night 2020 is a success. It has become intellectually and culturally fruitful and enriching.
Yes, I definitely agree with you, Kian. Our past months are filled with doubts, uncertainties, and longing for hopes that this current situation the world is facing right now will soon end. And kaya naman, the concept and value of Confucianism, I hope that we have at least be inspired by that. And so, to continue to live with ourselves, with our loved ones, and to others in fighting this challenging world. But before everything goes, let me also introduce to you the presence of our dearest Assistant Professor John Michael Vidanilla, our program coordinator of the Asian Studies, to give us his closing remarks and to impart his inwardly thoughts and visions for this 32nd event of Confusion Night.
Thank you, Walden. Am I audible?
Yes, sir, you're audible.
Okay, thank you very much. So I've been tasked with the happy task of closing the event. Good evening, everyone. Foremostly, I would be remiss not to thank our distinguished speakers, Mr. Mark Kevin S. Cabral of the Hong Kong University of Science and Technology, and Dr. Christine Abigail Tan of Nanyang Technological University. We beam with pride as they have selflessly imparted their time and expertise in speaking truth to the power of education as one of the high forms of self cultivation. Confucius himself was a teacher, and such graciousness in imparting their knowledge is a form of paying it forward and perpetuating the Confucian models as to what constitutes a well rounded human being. Again, our sincerest thanks to our speakers and organizers. Collaborations like this gives me great hope for what the future holds for the philosophy and Asian studies programs. It shows not just the richness in our common roots, but also enlivens our attempt at participating in our common destiny to inspire our students to become well rounded, engaged, and informed individuals. Confucianism may largely reflect collective tendency, that is true, but it never fell short on individual expectations. Our students are still sitting at the feet of the master, and soon they too shall forge a path for themselves as they seek to transform themselves as individuals of merit and of integrity, and in doing so, change the world by example and become teachers in their own right. Now more than ever, we find the teachings of Confucius to be as engaging as it were than during his time. His era was marked with a perceived collapse of good governance in the midst of struggling factions and intractable conflicts that covered the whole of ancient China. Ours is also a time of great opportunity as it mirrors the time of our master. Hence, we would not be walking in blind. I encourage everyone to continue pursuing this life of scholarship with the aim of addressing the maladies of our time and our society. We have much to thank for the treasure troves bequeathed to us by the Master, and more to hope for with the students like you continuing this Confucian Night. And so to close, as with all traditions, we move in the spirit of continuity, but with the passage of time, our traditions are also animated with the signposts of change. I wish to congratulate everyone for this marvelous tradition of continuity and change. We have long grappled to build on the content of Confucian philosophy, but with the ever-changing means of bringing together great minds and partners in discovering ourselves in the world and the world in ourselves, the means to deliver this content has all the more been enriched through our virtual platform that we enjoyed today, this evening. Confucius may not have extended his vision of society in this way, but surely your exercise of blending merit and order does not belie the teachings of the great teacher. I think the organizing classes of the philosophy program and the Asian studies program and what do you call this? Their instructor or lecturer, okay, Mr. Peter Mara. Thank you for continuing this tradition, and I wish everyone a splendid evening. Thank you, Walden.
Thank you, sir. We also for that very delightful message. Now, to lead us in our closing prayer, may I call upon Mr. Emmanuel Encarnacion.
So let us put ourselves in the presence of God in the name of the Father and of the Son and of the Holy Spirit. Amen. Dear Lord, we thank you for such an enlightening encounter today between scholars of philosophy, for providing us a way for this tradition to have continued on despite the pandemic. May this serve as a beacon for us to study it for its own sake towards the true, the good, and the beautiful. And may what we have learned from it remain with us as we strive towards the living of a virtuous life. As we conclude it now, we humbly ask of thee to bless us, to inflame us with a love for truth, that we may always live in pursuit of it. As we say, glory be to the Father, and to the Son, and to the Holy Spirit, as it was in the beginning, is now, and ever shall be, world without end. Amen. Saint Thomas Aquinas, pray for us. In the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit. Amen.
Now, to our dear viewers and notable guest speakers, we thank you for still tuning with us as we now close the event. Once again, this has been Walden Opelak from UST Asian Studies Society.
And I am Kian Pablera from the USC Department of Philosophy.
Until next year for the 33rd Confucian Night. Let us all
Thank you
join
very
in
much.
singing our university's hymn.
The Confucian Night is considered a highlight activity of ArtLet students taking up philosophy and Asian studies program. Founded in 1988 by Professor Emeritus Alfredo Pico, the event commemorates the birth anniversary of the great master Kongzi every 28th day of September. Perhaps it is the only event in the country that is devoted to celebrate the great philosopher sage.
Remember, I came back 81, and at that stage, I thought there was only St. Thomas More lecture that was mainly directed to the academic community. And I thought that it is important to come up with a formal forum for students. There should be an avenue for an annual conference that is focused on philosophy. Now, at that time, since I was handling Chinese philosophy in the major, and the course has to be given to the major students, so I decided to organize an annual lecture dedicated to Confucius. It became very popular. In fact, it was an event that was being looked forward to by philo majors and AS majors. that it went on. Every time a new class is offered in Chinese philosophy, students would come eagerly trying to organize the conference. It was almost part of their senior class highlight activities, academic highlight activities.
Through the years, the event caters to the academic needs of the students and faculty in conference organization, event management, and academic dialogue among scholars in the field of Confucian philosophy. But what makes this event very unique is perhaps the essential harmony of different facets of life combined in one spectacle. The rational intellectual, cultural, gustatory, and most importantly, the social interpersonal. Students and faculty members take this event seriously, that they come in their best outfit as they listen to an academic lecture, enjoy a sumptuous banquet, and socialize with the guests. Perhaps such event can be translated to Kongtsu's primordial love for life and its ceremonious celebration. For the past 3 decades, the Confucian Night has conducted lectures delivered by top diplomats, professors, researchers, postgraduate students, religious, and many more. On its 4th decade since its inception, the Confucian Night continued to inspire the future researchers, scholars, and enthusiasts of Confucian philosophy. Given our current situation, the long artlet tradition lives on as we open the event to the public through a virtual webinar format. Welcome to the 32nd Confucian Night, Confucianism and beyond.